Excellent. So welcome, welcome. I'm Peggy Hoffman. Welcome to our wonderful conversation today about revamping chapters, chapter structures, and chapter processes. Who's the we behind this webinar? The we behind this webinar is, of course, Billhighway, the incredible tech solution in the cloud that does some amazing things and allows you all to really renovate the entire organization by providing technology tools, and that actually also help you renovate how you're doing member engagement and performance data. And Mariner, we help you renovate your training, your structures, your processes. Both Billhighway and Mariner, we're here because we believe that there is a strong history of geographic chapters and other components and a very strong future for them. So that's what brings us together so that we can build this community to actually tackle the questions that are on our minds. And speaking of questions on our minds, change. So in the benchmarking report that we did 2 years ago, it was really interesting because more than a third of the folks said they either made substantial change or a third said they expected to make changes. So we know that change is on the minds. But then most recently, we found out that 50% of the folks in the survey had a chapter structure change in progress, or, and almost the same number, a process change in progress. Now, 29% reported that the process change was completed, and 11% said that the structure change was completed. All this conversation and work on change leaves a lot of questions, because I will tell you in that survey, we probably got more questions than we have examples of those changes. You know, it's really interesting. Changes on our mind, but we kind of have to really say, like, what are we changing and why are we changing it? Because one of the things that we're going to hear about today is that change is difficult when you're working with volunteers, some who are really keep it the way it was kind of mentality. But there are really good reasons for us to think about change. And I'd like you guys now to weigh in, if you wouldn't mind. I'm going to put up two polls. The first poll is one that I'm interested in finding out. What are you changing? And maybe you're thinking about changing it, but what's the purpose of changing? So what do we have to change? Now, this is a longer poll, so do make sure that you open up the window. And it's multiple choice. But are you looking at processes? Are you looking at policies? Do you think that you need to change operations? Maybe there's consolidation. Maybe it's the governance model, right? Maybe you're thinking, you know what? Geography is not as relevant to us, and we have to figure out how we embrace issue, interest, and discipline. Maybe those pockets are becoming more important. And maybe it's an affiliation agreement. I also put the other there. You know, we always put other in our polls because there's something else that's going to be elevated. But essentially, these are the elements that people reported in the survey as things that they were in the process of or had recently changed. So I'm just curious, in terms of the folks that are here on the call today, what's on your mind? What do you think that needs to be changed? I'm seeing some good conversation coming in here. We've got a good portion of you already connected, but I can see that we've got maybe another 20% of you that might want to weigh in. So if you're having problems with the polls, we always invite you, of course, to go ahead and jump into chat. Conference strategy, yes. And when we change the educational strategies or the way we're offering services strategies, there's going to be an impact throughout the system, kind of a ripple effect. And sometimes it really it's an opportunity for us to then say, how does that change at the other levels of the organization? All right, let me end the poll and share with you what we've got. So for many folks, it's focused around the processes and the policies. I see there's a couple of folks that really want to centralize the operations, and we do have a case study, or sort of two case studies related to that. there's an interesting group of you that say, let's go ahead and take a look at the structure itself. So let me go on to the next poll, because yes, it's important that we ask the question of what do we want to change, but the other question is, why do we have to make that change? So I'm never a person that feels like you should just change to keep things fresh, unless we're talking about your clothing. But there has to be a reason for us to change. And maybe you have inactivity on the chapter level. And I put SIGs, thinking of SIGs as being the non-geographic version, right? So maybe there's inactivity. Maybe there are expressed challenges. In other words, volunteers or members accessing them have expressed that stuff. So you're reacting to what you're hearing. Maybe there's just a lagging ROI. Like, we know we're putting this money in, but we're not seeing the value back after it. Could there be a mismatch? Many of us, as we do a strategic plan, we identify new priorities, and sometimes the old systems are a mismatch to the new strategic priorities. Maybe the change in why we even have member communities. Maybe this is like, we don't have member communities because we need the farm team. Maybe it's, we have member communities because we have big issues to solve and we want them to work on specific things, right? And of course, other. And I love it, Martha, you are jumping right in, and I appreciate that. And thank you also, Rachel. A more consistent experience for members across states and between national and states. Absolutely. It's that sense of people have a brand in their mind and they equate sometimes their least best experience to the brand. So you want to make sure that you have a good, that even where it's soft, it still has the right experience. Understanding the relationship between the national organization, how it supports local chapters, and what that relationship should look like. A lot packed into that. Yes. And it's really interesting because more and more I'm suggesting to folks that they think about the chapters not as a separate element, but as part of an ecosystem. And Rachel, I feel like that's what you're getting at here, and to a certain degree, and certainly Martha is in her comment, this notion of the chapters not being isolated, but that there's an ecosystem, and where do chapters or SIGs play in that particular scenario. Let me go ahead. Looks like as soon as I started to say, let me close the poll, two more answers popped in. So let me go ahead and end the poll. Looks like it's quiet, and share the results. So as you can see, and I'm not surprised that the inactivity or the rumblings are a significant part of why we're reacting now. COVID gave us cover. It opened some doors, it showed some rust or some real weaknesses in the systems, but it also gave us cover to acting on those two elements, I believe. But I'm really curious about the mismatch with strategic priorities, and would love to see in chat anybody who responded to that just share a little bit more about that mismatch in strategic priorities. All right. As we do that, I'm going to move us along here. When we went ahead to put together this session, we were going like, well, how do we think about this? And it came to our mind. I guess I should say came to your mind because I watch a lot of renovation programs, but it came to mind that this is something like the decision we make when we're looking around at where we're living, right? And when we begin to look at it this way, we actually begin to get a sense of the fact that there are opportunities for us to think about this as a reno, a remodel, or a rebuild. So a reno is really focused on restoring something that's not working well, that's maybe old, into good repair. You're retaining the purpose, right? But you're making it more efficient or effective. A remodel changes the form, the design, potentially the functionality, right? So a remodel says, you know what? Yes, the why is still there, but we've got to shift to something else. And maybe this is where a lot of folks during COVID took extra spaces and turned it into new spaces, right? One of my cousins did an amazing job with the with a large part of their garage, making it a full school setup for the kids. So it's taking something and saying we need to change the form. A new build says the how and the why questions have fundamentally changed. We got to start from scratch. So what we want to do today is take a look at examples within these three areas, because maybe for some of us it's the reno, for some of us it's the remodel, but in other cases we really do need to look at the rebuild. So thinking of reno, we're talking about that sort of that sense of restoring. Maybe it's restoring to the to a more efficiency. Maybe it's restoring back to the original core of what its purpose was, right? So in this particular case, I want to highlight a really cool example coming out of the Billhighway family of clients, and this is RIMS. And what they decided to do was really to take a look at how, if we renovate how we're supporting and managing and the flow of the operations, how might we reduce siloed systems, lessen administrative burden, eliminate risk of fraud, which they had experienced, and gain insight into chapter performance. So if that's the goal, the solution then was to say, all right, we really need to get rid of the siloed systems, because that's what's getting in the way. That's what's getting in the way that is putting more burden on our volunteers, right? And it's creating an opportunity. It's more difficult to manage the risk correctly, right? And we don't know in real time how things are going, so that we can be as in the moment as possible to support. So that was the concept, was how do we go ahead and do that in a way that supports the program? And so they invested in the Billhighway chapter in the box solution. Now, what I want to highlight here, because I think this is the exciting part about this, is that the bonus here, and someone talked about this, across the system experience, the bonus here was alignment in brand and standard processes, which did what? Positive impact for member improvement. Oh, and also incredible improved data. Now, there is fortunately a really good, much more robust look at this particular case study available from Billhighway, and I believe Sarah will go ahead and drop that in to chat or point us to where we can get it, because we'd love to be able to talk a little bit more about this in detail. Once I go through all of these, if there are questions about any one of these, if we've got somebody on, and I know I have Mark Prevost on the phone, we can certainly talk a little bit more about it. But this idea was, how do we centralize administration? Now, from a slightly different perspective, we have what's happening over at ACES. Susan Modale, I had a great conversation with her, and I think I've got Jess and maybe Jenny from that organization on. And so again, if there are questions specific to this, the reason why I wanted to share this is because this is about this notion of getting closer to the chapter so that you can apply the right support. You can apply the resources at the place where it's needed in the way that it's needed. So they had a rather cumbersome governance structure, if you will. And one of the things that Susan and I talked about a lot was the problem was all of the steps that a volunteer had to go through before they had a connection to the staff. And yet the staff were often the place that could actually apply, that could actually support, that could actually provide the resources. So how do we get global staff closer to the chapters? But also, how do we then, because ACES is a huge organization, they've got, I believe, over 200 and some chapters in countries far flung. How do we get the support zoomed into where they're operating and be able to understand the cultural differences? So what they did was they took this system, the hierarchical system of all these volunteer roles, and instead said, you know, we're going to have our global board, but then let's have regional boards to support chapters within an area. And the boards they're in the process of building this out to more and more complex level, but the boards will have committees that focus on key functions, membership, membership, learning and events, finance and governance or business development, and then a committee specifically for each chapter chair and vice chair or vice president, so that they can be able to share what it means to be a leader in that chapter. So if you take, for example, the North American board, they've got a regional board, 12 people, 120 chapters, being able to stay closer to those individual chapters and make a difference. So it's really about taking a system that gets closer to the volunteers where they are, but also allow staff to have a better connection to those volunteers. And they built out their staff to help with this, so that certainly is a part of it. But what I really liked about this was the bonus was they're able to really adjust the training. And they have created actually this kind of new volunteer pathway through this the global committees, and presumably they're going to see some new people popping in and a new opportunity for them to have this connection. I do think the other cool thing that they're working on right now, and it goes back to that ecosystem scenario, is that they have, and I hope I get this right, I think they have 29 or 27 or 29 or something like that, subject matter communities, which have been somewhat isolated from the geographic, but yet there's this incredible opportunity for this synergy. And so part of what they're doing on these in these committees is bringing in and having better conversations across the two of them. So when you renovate that sort of chain of command, you begin to create new pathways. Excellent. So 2 examples of renos. I'm going to ask you to throw into the chat any renos that you're doing. And thank you, Jessica. I'm glad to see your name pop up. Excellent. 39 of those subject matter communities. That is super cool. So go ahead. I'm going to ask, as I talk about these, if there is someone from the association, to go ahead and please correct or add on, and if we have questions for you, we'll jump in there too. So I see a good conversation around this idea of experience the start. I'm sorry, I'm going back because you know how I love to see what you all are talking about. Yes. Okay. So, Laurie, thank you. I just saw a question come in about the idea that chapters don't seem very interested in getting their participants to join our organization. I find this as odd. Is this a problem for others? I think I want to break that down and answer the question in some ways, 2 ways. One is that, and there'll be exceptions to every rule, but I work with a lot of organizations and a lot of chapters, and in general, chapters are not the best place for member recruitment. They are the sweet spot for member engagement, and member engagement is also something that they naturally do really well. So I would be, and if you have a highly engaged group of members in a chapter, other members will come. So I always like to say to folks, if you're not getting that feedback that they're interested in selling that joint membership or one or the other parts of that membership, part of it is getting them to focus on member engagement, and then you have the opportunity to open the door. The second thing is, if they're not going to do this, if they're not going to sell for you, let's say they can come in and be a chapter only member, then it's how effectively do you allow chapter data? Because if you have the data, you can do the sell. So I hope that helps a little bit. Oh, Tiffany, love that idea. Thanks for throwing that in there. Did you have any impact? Pamela, that is a huge question. And part of what we have to do before we start the how are we going to change is to say, how are we going to know that the change is impactful? So I love you asking the question about the impact. So remodel means that I'm going to just sort of break some things down. I'm going to change some purpose and some functionality. And we've got a couple examples of the remodel. So a typical one that I am seeing is one that I'm going to share from the American Staffing. Now, this is an interesting one for me to share in a large part because of ultimate destination. But it really is kind of a two-part change. And also, I think the bonus, I'll tell you about when we get to it, is a large part of what it has done for the possibility of change in the future. But the goal essentially back when, and this takes us back to about 2019, was to meet the needs of different communities. You have a lot of affiliates, and a number of those affiliates were seriously struggling. I mean, and I know we all have this. We have folks that can do it. They can pull the cart. They've got the horses that they need. The resources are there. They may struggle a little bit from year to year, but they got it going, and other groups can't. And so part of what they wanted to do was to say, okay, well, we can't have a one size fits all. We've got to begin to think a little bit more differently. And so what they wound up doing was evolving into a system where they created where they created essentially state network. I know I can speak state network. And the idea was to support these groups to be able to put on a couple of in-person events, right? So they did in-person networking events and a virtual event here and there, and a couple of regional conferences. So essentially, when they came in the house, they were providing these folks with full support by staff, and really, it was grounded in this fact that at the end of the day, not having staff was the determinant between a group being successful or not. Now, was it successful? It was getting some traction, and then COVID hit. They tried to do virtual, but what they found instead was that folks were just not that interested, and they were interested though in industry segments. And so the concept is involved in two phases, because they went from underperforming chapters to supported state network that still did some in-person, to this wonderful idea to morph into industry segments. So they gave me some examples. They now have 6 industry segments. They still have activities happening, but women in leadership is an example of one that has gone just jumped out, right? Why? Because women, unfortunately, still are the ones that tend to get left behind when it comes to travel money, time out of the office. They're juggling many things. But when this group really focused and went virtual, all of a sudden they were able to make some serious connections. So they went from under, like, say, 50 people. They've now not 900 or so folks involved. They had 225 people in the in-person meeting. So really, just some amazing stuff. And their impact, to speak of the impact, is they were able to offer through these role-specific, topic-specific networking calls via these 6 industry segments, more than 200 free virtual 1-hour networking opportunities. Nowhere near that when they were state networks. So this remodel is simply saying people want to get together. They don't want to get together the way we were forcing them to get together, which was in person at a state network. They want to get together with people, birds of a feather. And if we build it in this particular case and support them, it will get what we want, which is driving member engagement, driving member retention. And more importantly, this was an iterative change, so it has opened the door for future change. I think it's a win-win remodel for all of those reasons. And it asks us to ask, is it geography? Or is it industry? Issue? Discipline? All right, remodel number 2 is also about adding options, but this adding option is not shifting to a group that does that's based on a specific industry. It's still looking at geography, and I know that we have an amazing we have an amazing person on our chat who can correct me as I share this if need to. Now, this is very much in progress. I believe that the words she used were, crawl, walk, run, and they're somewhere in that walk stage, perhaps. But this is a classic and yet non-traditional look at how do you answer the question. We've got to meet the needs of struggling affiliates, and we've got to meet them by creating alternative pathways, not trying to replace everything, just simply saying we've got struggling affiliates. They need a different approach from us. So how do we do that? Now, they did a whole bunch of changes kind of bundled in, but the ones I want to share with you really are how they looked at the sense of how do we support affiliates in a sort of a general sense, and then specifically to the struggling ones. And they looked at it from two different lenses. The one lens was this whole concept around membership, right? And the idea here was that because they have Elmos, you can, come in at different levels. How do we make it easy for people to choose the dual membership? And how do we make it easy for people to choose the dual membership, regardless of which door they're peeking through? So perfect case in that what they did was they did a call out 3 years ago. Hey, does anybody want to try this? 6 of them said yes. 18 then, by the time the pilot was out, 18 of them had jumped on it. Listen to this impact. So both sides give up about 12.5% to make a price point that was going to be viable. MGMA collects, processes, and distributes, no admin fee. So streamline the process for the end user, streamline the process for the affiliate, right? Get the data in a place that we can use it and analyze it. And then the super impact was the retention rate was fabulous for those that came in the dual door. And the big winner for the states was new members that they didn't have to spend a whole lot of time chasing after. So they said, we want to look at a way that we can do this where we can support. But that still left a number of folks that were struggling, right? So in addition to that, they did a subsidiary chapter model. In this particular model, they basically said, if you're struggling, aka you can't meet the newly, and I'll come back to this in a minute, newly established KPIs by year end 23, which that's coming up, then you're going to give up your independence, yes, but you're going to become a subsidiary chapter model, yes, and you're going to get support from us. We're going to help you. We're going to help you build yourself to the place where you can actually meet those KPIs. So the idea here is, yes, they would take over sort of I'm going to just lump it as a kind of operational support. And essentially, everybody's going to have this dual opportunity, this dual membership opportunity, right? So that can work. You put all of this together, and the bonus for this, to a large degree, was they had to establish a state matrix. They had to say, well, what are the KPIs that are really important for us? And how do we make sure that's grounded in something that makes sense? So they established it. They requested the financial documents. That was a whole thing dealing with that. But they requested the financial documents so they could create KPIs that made sense. They reached out. They used the ASAE data to determine what is financial stability, to determine the ratio for determining based on revenue and expenses. They went to marketing generals about what is average membership retention to set that KPI. And then, because almost everybody was able to do 12 hours of interactive education as a metric, they used a metric that they knew was achievable in their states. And then they simply said, we're going to look at a point system where if you're under a certain number of points, 64, you're red and you have serious concerns. And they worked with each of those states that showed up in that level. And they, supported and offer any of the yellow or the greens as well. I think the neat thing that came out of this, I thought, was this notion of it gave them an opportunity to set some metrics that everybody could count. And it helps people be more honest. And it helps boards have better conversations. And the bonus was that pilot turned into a, yeah, everybody's going to offer the dual, boosted member retention. And Martha captured it beautifully in her chat when she says it allows state volunteers to do what they like to do, engagement and program development, and national do what it can do best, which is taking over the financial risk, being supportive to make sure the organization is in a great and powerful place. So I think that I think that this is also an example, just like the ASA example, and reflects what Mary Byers, hi Mary, great to see you on the call. The point that she makes there very importantly, that iterative change is a valuable concept when working with chapter change. So the iterative changes here that MGMA did, they might tell you it was a little bit more compressed, but I'm going to tease it aside to say they piloted something that had a win-win, right? They had an opportunity to engage people in the conversation around the financial scenario so that they could, in fact, determine whether the metrics are going to make sense. You roll these things out and you begin to see, as ASA did, we're going to try this. It's going to work under these circumstances. Circumstances change. What's going to be the next thing? Listening and bringing in the feedback and then making the change. The iterative change really, I think, does help. Really does help the chapter leaders along the process. It's not everything, mind you. I know that when I talked with Martha and MGMA, I just want to mention they have one other change that they're really working on, which is a conference model. And I think, one of the things that this kind of goes with this, and I might put words in Martha's mouth here a little bit, but they did change. And one of the things that that she's thinking about now is when you have volunteers and what is too much change? How do we slow it down a little bit? So it kind of underscores the comment about iterative change. So excellent, beautiful. Yes, and so I'm just looking back a little bit forward, revamping member recruitment assets for chapter to use with insight and feedback from the chapters that they find helpful. I think that any reno that helps you streamline and create efficiencies can actually open the door for a remodel where you're actually moving some walls. So from that iterative situation, think of what do I change to get people ready for me to go ahead and knock down a wall. All righty. And here we go with the third, the rebuild. Now, this rebuild model that I'm going to show you is, it's still in progress. And I can speak to a number of others that are in progress. It's been a very exciting couple of years since the pandemic because associations are really starting to say, we got to start from scratch because the fundamental why and the fundamental how has changed. So what do I mean by the how? Well, how we are connecting as a people has changed. We're much more used to webinars. We're getting better at using chat and polls in webinars, right? We're getting better at finding the interactivity options, right? In webinars and in Zoom and in Teams. So as we have accepted this, we can now weigh the time and the cost to get someplace against the fact that I can get something out of this. So the way we do it, we've continued, come on guys, we know this, we've continued to be a digital. Now with chat AI, let's just say chat GPT and the other ones, our ability to do things, to iterate ideas, to come up with new ways of doing things, to solve things in different ways and different configurations is immense. So the how, right? But I think the other really important thing that we're not looking at is the why. And the why, I believe, has changed. People don't necessarily need a geographic chapter to find their people, to get their education, to have their leadership journey start. The why is because we have something that has to be done that needs the local area to get it done. The why might still be legislative. The why might be a community acceptance. The why might be hands-on training, but that's different than saying we need chapters to be minis. And so that gets us to this idea of, can we do it differently if we recognize what it is we're trying to do differently? I had a delightful conversation with Joanna at MHI Work, and this is a change in progress. But what I really like about this example is that they started with, what are we really trying to do? And they said, what we're really trying to do is to take a look at what people need to get together for, and then how do we organize that getting together in a way that makes sure it meets the members' needs. So in other words, the clarified purpose is that we understand that folks need to be able to get in the room together to be able to take a look at specific issues that are here and now in this place, in this location. So the point to this is that so let me go back and say that MHI is the nation's largest material handling, logistics, and supply chain association, and work is the people, right? So if I'm working in a facility, I need to be able to go down and see the facility in my same town to learn a little bit more about the logistics and how I can handle it. Maybe a group of us have to get together to solve for something right in our own state or in our own region that we're working with. So they really needed to focus on the reasons why people had to get together. And what they said was, let's do this differently. And now I will tell you that during COVID, these groups in particular went dormant. When they were looking to sort of get them back together again, folks were reluctant or not able to get together. In addition to which, they began to find out that even the folks that wanted to get together did not have the time and did not have the energy to do any of this. Meanwhile, their merger or their acquisition by MHI gave them an opportunity to begin to think about a different group of people that might come into their space and play in a positive way. So how do we connect them sort of all together? And they began to say, well, if all we're going to do is put Band-Aids on it, we're not going to get where we need to go. So they birthed the idea of a chapter leadership council. So they had essentially 10 regions. The chapter leadership council will be, I'm going to put in air quotes, the mega chapter board, right? That will oversee the regions with the intention of finding at least one person in each region who will be kind of the go-to person to help plan facility tours and networking events. So in essence, what they did was, instead of having 10 boards, which were never fully seated and had no energy, you pull folks together, about 10 or so, get them together in the room and say, what needs to happen at local scenarios? And you've got enough diversity around the board to know what each region needs. Then you get a connection back, not another board, not another committee, but a connection back. And you say, let's see, we want to get some plant tour. We want to get this. What do you think? Who do you know? Do some networking. Now you're just doing this really good old-fashioned networking. I know a guy that knows a woman who knows a guy that knows a woman, kind of thing. And you begin to put it together. Now, what makes this model, I think, particularly beautiful is they have a national programming committee supported by national staff, right? That is already planning their big conference and putting all of this together, right? So what we need to do is let them guide or lead or own the educational conversation, right? They're already involved in saying, what does the profession and the trade need? Where do we get the best of the best content to present it? And when is content best presented in a session versus a webinar versus a conversation? And so the conversation around the content lives in a committee whose whole focus is having that committee, whose whole focus, is on the education for the profession. So ostensibly, what this group will do is help the individual regions identify where there is content opportunities. So they're doing it in stages. So this year, for example, they get so many responses to the call for session proposals for the national conference that happens in June. So they're going to take a combination of the ones, so as the committee's looking at, they're going to say, well, this would be a great regional topic. And they're going to, now they have more spaces to spend these incredible proposals. Combined with, I'll take the sessions with the 3 highest ratings on a roadshow. So essentially, you have national really supporting the education, assuring, keep in mind, assuring a good experience across it, right? Now, they're leaving lots of options open. So let's just say a region really starts rocking and rolling and they want to work on their own. They want to have maybe a couple of folks doing it. Fine. They're willing to go ahead and do that. So they're in the beginning of this. They fortunately have an association with the mindset of this is an investment. So they are investing in, they're investing some budget in to get this going. They're really looking at the possibility of building out some additional staff support. All of that is to come, obviously. But what I really thought was cool was it gave another pathway for engagement, another pathway for volunteering that really grabs people in those small jobs, right? Because in essence, the council is a council and that's a term position, but everything else underneath it is going to be an ad hoc or a micro role. So you can find, test some pretty cool people in the field that might very well become some of the best national leaders later. So the new pathways for engagement and volunteering is pretty exciting. They've done a couple of other things. Go to their website. They're building this out. Joanne, who could not be here with us, Joanne's going to be here. It would be happy to talk with folks as they roll it out. And I think it's an exciting one for us to watch. I see Monica has said you have a council under the board with 13 regions and 13 regional directors, and selecting the right regional is very important. I can understand that. And we are in a safe space. I can't tell you how many times that phrase said in one way or the other at the end of that chat is oh so true. And I see Mary sad but true. Yes. And I'm going to say that if you look at the ASAE latest research that just came out at the beginning of the year on holistic volunteer systems, you're going to see that we talk a lot about the right person in the right job, and we really have to create a scenario where we have the right competencies listed, we have the right expectations stated, and then we have the right training to support. So we've shared a couple of examples here. We have 2 links to white papers. We're going to share with you their white papers that are a little bit older now that we have done. We're doing some work on it. We have a special announcement at the end about that work. But essentially, you will see additional models in those examples from diabetes educators. There's one from IDXA, CPXA, and a couple of others. And so take a look at those. Are any of these things perfect for you? Who knows? Are any of them perfect even if you do it? No. I am a great believer that when you launch something like this, you are going to, at the moment you launch it, say, when are we reviewing it and when are we going to shift it again? Because at the end of the day, no model that is going to work forever. Anyway, but that gets us to the question of how do you even navigate this process? Lots of questions that we got on the survey were really about 2 things, the process and where do we bring stakeholders in. So I'm going to suggest to you that I might have a slightly different perspective on how to do this. I always believe that we identify with the why do we even have member communities? and what's the impact we expect from them in measurable terms. You have to start with the why and the how we'll know it's going to be successful. Otherwise, all we're doing is trying to make someone happier who isn't happy right now. And then I think we have to do a full assessment of the program against the why, not against yesterday's why, but against today's why. And in order to do this, I'm going to suggest that you have to gather the voices. I am not a proponent of let's bring together a task force with a blank sheet and ask them to design something. I'd rather you bring in a bunch of different little focus groups and have a conversation with different people and gain their understanding of what's working and what's not working. And then tap your data. Tap your data. One of the things that IREM is doing, and they're doing an amazing chapter rebuild, which is going to be fabulous. But they're taking their steps very, very calmly and quietly, and they're doing a major data mining, which is going to be fabulous in supporting some of their decisions. They haven't built the whole system, but they did define the why and the impact that they needed. That was their first step. And then I want you to go deeper. I want you to use the reflection questions. We've got some good reflections at the end of this. We're going to skip the slide deck out to you. And then make the business case. Before you design, before you do anything else, make the business case. And I want you to do this because any of these changes require investment, and any of these changes require the board to be thinking about what's the balance of this. And so we as CRPs and people who are supporting the change process have to make that business case. When you make the business case, these other pieces can fall in line. Then charge a design team. There's no one way to do the design team, but it's a team now that has the business case for having the member communities, and you understand what they view as it will be the positive impact. And now you can design based on what you need to get out of it, right? And then test the concept. I love the fact that MGMA did a pilot test. I've had a number of folks, when they get started, they build alongside. So I was talking to someone a couple of weeks ago, and the idea here is let's just build something alongside and see how it works. Someone asked, do you just rip the Band-Aid off? Well, I've worked with 2 organizations, and I believe I think I saw one person already on here, so I think could weigh in on this. The rip the Band-Aid off is in some ways better because you just rip it off and then you're solving, then you're just dealing with what's there, but it can do a lot more damage. So you have to determine. At one group, we ripped the Band-Aid off, and it turned out to be the best thing possible because we were able to roll everybody within 12 months into a new model. But the other organization, I would say, that probably was part of some of the struggles. So, but when you test and you pilot, people see success. And only then, don't get into trying to suggest what the implementation is going to be like until, don't put, you create concern and expectations, test it in dialogue and in pilot, and then say, okay, this is where we are, this is how we're going to roll it out. And then you take the first step. Notice how I'm saying the first step. You're navigating the waters, and the waters are going to get rough, and they're going to get smoother, and they're going to be endless, and it's a wonderful journey, but it is a forever journey in all the most positive ways. Yes, Monica, I'm going to just high five you on that, and yes, and to that comment. All right, the last question, and we've got I want to go through a couple of thoughts on engaging the stakeholders and then see if there's any questions for you. So please start getting the questions ready in chat, however you want to share them with us. But so many people said, how do we bring the stakeholders in? And actually, some of the comments were more like, how do I ensure change is supported at the top and the grassroots? How do I communicate, socialize, and get buy-in for the charge? How do I ensure chapters are sustainable? How do I get buy-in? How do I overcome apathy? How do I, okay? This is going to be so organizational, individual to the organization is what I'm trying to say. However, I think the best thing that you can do is start off this question of who will be affected and how. And then based on each of those groups, how can they best support the process? This takes time to answer these questions. But if you answer these questions correctly, you will get the stakeholders engaged in a process the most effectively as you can. You do not want a design team, for example, of a lot of people who have been around the chapters forever and have a lot to say, right? The design team is the team that likes to take things apart and reconfigure them, right? The people that are going to ask that are going to be involved in how you roll it out are going to be a combination of the people who are your fans, right? The people who care about the organization, put the organization first, as well as some of those who need to be helped along to see it, because then they can speak most authentically, right? There's different roles for different folks, and trying to do it all in a task force isn't going to work. So start with who's going to be affected and how. Now, this step is very powerful too, because chapter leaders think that they're the only ones going to be affected and they're going to be the most damaged. We sometimes forget about the members who don't care about chapters, as an example. We sometimes forget about the employers of folks who have to make a decision should somebody join the chapter. So who's going to be affected and how, and then how they support it. A couple of places to engage is to have a group that, and you can do this in focus groups, you can do this in a quick little survey, you can do this in one-on-one interviews, but ID what's necessary or preferred, what are the necessary or preferred requirements for the new system. So this is where you talk to people about how they're doing something and how they would like to do it. This is where people say, what's not getting done that really ought to be getting done. This is where you ask questions of what are we asking you to do that doesn't make sense anymore, right? And this can be in a broad stroke, bring lots of voices into it. I find sometimes that as starting with a couple of one-on-one interviews into a survey product, into some focus groups is a great way of doing this, but you can do one of those steps and get that in there, right? Then you want to say, get together a group of people saying that, okay, let's just do, keep these your blue sky people, right? How should it be designed? What could we do? Oh my gosh. This is a group, this is going to be like a think tank. They don't have to have a long 6 months. They won't be able to. There's a unique set of group of people who can come in and say what ifs, right? Then how should it be rolled out and integrated? This is where you get in a couple of folks. If you've got staff at the chapter level, this is where you bring them. That's where you bring them in. This is where you go across your silos in your organization and the people that are going to be impacted on it. The foundation that gets money from the folks, the education people that are trying to synchronize some of the education, the customer service people. This is where you bring in all these other voices who are currently implementing what is being implemented and will be tasked with doing it, to ask them for their thoughts, right? Another one is that you identify a group that says, okay, what kinds of training do you need? What kinds of communications do you need? This is a different group of people who are going to give you the sense of, well, I don't know how to do this. I would like to know how to do this. What do you not know how to do that you wish we had been trained on, and how do you like to be trained? These are the people that also will beta test your training and your communications, right? Maybe there's the folks where you just put them on. And I loved this. One of the groups right before COVID was doing a big change process, and they put up a whole website that was tracking all the steps of the change. And they had on almost every place, they had a tell us what you think, tell us what you think. And they were collecting what people thought and then summarizing and giving it back again. So maybe it's just simply that you have a place where you have this open and ongoing dialogue. And finally, You do need the folks that are going to ID the potential obstacles and risks. So this is where you might bring, for example, folks, this is where you might bring a corporate lawyer in, right? Take a look at this. What do you think? Or your CPA. These are people that you come in, you ask them to take a look at these different things like this. But this is also where you get people who have been through change before to look at this and say, how is this going to play? What are we going to run into? So I'm suggesting to you that you want to engage stakeholders, but you want to engage them at different parts of the process in different ways, as opposed to letting the board put together a task force and give them 3 months to come up with a new plan. So don't handicap yourself that way, okay? Bring the people in at the right time. Peter also always reminds clients when we're getting ready to work with them, he says, oh, I see we're almost, I was going to stop for questions. And one last thing, and I'll see what questions we got here. Peter always says, remember, most task forces do better when they have something to throw darts at, not when they have a blank piece of paper. So I wanted to show to you that we will go ahead and we have these questions. We're not going to go through them. I hadn't intended to, but you will have them in the program. So I have a couple minutes here. Was there any other questions that folks had? We've gone through a lot of ideas here. Oh, Kelsey, I wish I could say that I had. Let's see if anybody else in the group has done that. I know that there have been groups that have said we do not need them, but that was not a decision that was ever made public because chapters are sometimes viewed as the third rail. I have seen organizations decide that they would keep their chapters after they go through a whole process. They'll just let them continue to be affiliates as opposed to bringing them closer in. And in that case, they oftentimes will just say, if you're going to use our brand, we'll have a brand agreement. And so they try to stay arm's length from them. Anyone else have an example about that? I'm sure that there was an example in the field somewhere about someone who has determined they were not needed. Okay, a couple of things. All right, excellent. So a couple of things for you. Other questions, please put them in your post survey. We'll get to you. We'll get to them. We've got lots of really important things for us to share. The white papers, we'll give them to you, but two quick announcements. We are putting together a new options work group forming in late October. Please send me an email if you want to be in that task group. It's going to be about a 3-month commitment. We're going to take all of this information and more, and we're going to create a white paper to really bring all of this together. And we are also forming a peer-to-peer change in progress study group, which is going to probably be a 6-month commitment. It's going to be just a networking group. If you are in the midst of change, you will be invited to be this group, and it's going to be peer-to-peer support to work through in a safe environment some of the more difficult questions you come up to. So 2 work groups coming up. And finally, if you're in the DC area, October 10, 11, and 12 are dates for your calendar. The chapter roundtables are back thanks to Billhighway. We'll see you in Reston, Washington, D.C. or Alexandria. And wow, communications, it's our October 18th. But wait. Beth Z joins us November 8th. Beth Z joins us November 8th. We've had a great conversation. I feel like we left so much unsaid. Thank you for joining us today on behalf of Billhighway and Mariner. We love talking with you all and then bringing back to you all everything that we have heard and found. Hoping all is good on your end, folks. Please stay in touch. And thank you, big thank you on the part of Billhighway and Mariner.